Hello everyone and welcome to today's webcast, 9 Ways to Modernise Your Marketing Planning. My name is Sarah Gonzalez and I'm from Simple. So the traditional marketing planning period can be a frustrating time for marketers. Consider the marketplace, new competitors to evaluate, last year's analysis, new technology to consider, and then there's the annual dance with finance that we all love to hate. And with the growing pressures on business, the considerations of the customer experience and talk around Agile, are traditional planning processes keeping pace with modern marketing? And how can we update our processes for the digital era? Today I'm joined by Kate Gunby, founder of Guided by Numbers, an experienced marketing analytics practitioner with a passion for evidence-based marketing, and Jen Johnson, founder and CEO of Road Consulting. She's also a former financial services marketer who has a passion for marketing, performance, and project management. How are we both today?
Great, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining. So I first want to take a look at planning in general and also discuss the need for change. So, Kate, here on this slide, we actually have a traditional marketing planning process that many of us would recognise. It is Pat Lydia there. So is this still relevant, and what's really driving the need for change when we do talk about marketing planning?
Look, I think if you go through the stages as they are, they all still very much make sense. I think one of the key things is the iterations just tend to happen a lot more quickly, and it's not as linear as it was. So measurement you have at the end on a traditional plan, that's one thing that really won't cut it these days. And the big change is obviously digital technology. We talk about it over and over again, but it really is driving the change, not only in the way we can communicate with consumers, but also in the way we can measure and the feedback we get. You know, there's great things about it because we can see so much more, but there's also so much more data it can be hard to make sense of. And that's really changing and creating some of the challenges and opportunities that we need to sort of deal with. So the big thing you see is people trying to get around how do we integrate this and use the data without kind of chopping and changing all the time. So, you know, I think we're coming to the point where we're starting to really get some knowledge of how to do that, and, you know, the changing of the marketing role within that as well, and those digital opportunities.
And Jen, would you also agree with this? Should we be changing up the traditional way of planning? And if so, what's really driving the need for this?
Definitely. So feasibility checks are really important when it comes to determining what activity needs to be done or should be done. And it's a bit of a chicken and egg as well, right? So we can get down that process that you were talking about, ready to execute on the channel, but there's competing interests for those channels, particularly where there's own channels and it's a big organization, that there's a lot of competing interests. So it's not just marketing that's trying to use these assets. It's also maybe the community team or the corporate affairs team or any of those. So you really need to make sure that you're making these decisions a lot earlier using sort of a centralized feasibility forum to ensure that all the competing interests are weighed up and you're making the decisions up front around what activities should be done on that basis.
Definitely. So I really want to get into the nuts and bolts of the presentation. And one of the first problems that we all face, and I think any of us in marketing or any role when it does come to planning, is budget allocation. So, you know, prioritization and budget can be a nightmare for many marketers out there. Like I said earlier, there is this back and forth dance with finance, and in large enterprises, it can really be time consuming and sometimes even political, as you would have experienced. So, Kate, how can we get around this process when it does come to budgeting and prioritization and make it more efficient?
I mean, I think everyone will have heard a lot about sort of zero-based budgeting in the last sort of few years, and it's something that particularly a lot of the big FMCG companies very much follow. You know, I mean, it can sound hard, but really it's not assuming that you're going to get a budget based on last year and starting from the bottom up and effectively putting together a business case. A lot of people are intimidated by it, but really, if you think about it, I should have measures of what I think I'm achieving from my marketing already. So it's really, once you've got those metrics in place, a case of saying, well, with this budget, this is what I think I can achieve. And then being able to sort of balance that across all the different business units so that priorities are right, rather than just going in assuming that this is what I got, so this is what I'm going to do next year. So it brings about good practice because it enforces that measurement, and it enforces a good, honest discussion about what gains I think I'm going to get and getting that targeting in place.
Definitely. And Jen, waste can be pretty prolific in marketing teams. And I think, once we get into that planning stage, it's looking back and going, oh God, I really don't want to admit what happened over the last 12 months. But you actually talk about, I know, just all put our heads down right now. You actually talk about the concept of running this productivity project. So what does that entail and where would we even begin? And is it more work for us?
Yeah. The good news is there's always so much opportunity to find productivity savings. So I don't come from a creative background. I come from more of a metrics background, so I love getting my hands on marketing teams because they don't often have that same sort of background that I have. So really looking at time-stamping all the activity that's being done and looking at how where those savings are. So if you're not measuring what your team is doing, you're not going to be able to really understand where those cost savings are. So one of the examples that I use often for productivity is things like even just your media booking. So a lot of the time we find people are a little bit delinquent, a little bit tardy, and they're getting it done 2 weeks before they go live, the final decision. And, there's penalties, you're losing out on bonus spots that you would otherwise generate. If you can make sure that the process is put in place so that everyone must book their media 8 weeks in advance, you can generate some really big savings. And there's lots of examples of that. You can also talk about the amount of activity that's being done. So again, this is stepping back earlier in the process and saying, do we really need 3 big integrated campaigns this year? Or can we get away with 2 and running them longer? You can generate massive savings in that way.
Definitely.
Also being a lot more targeted in your approach. So, we had, gone are the days where we had big EDMs being sent out to everyone under the sun. Target it. Make sure that you can really get your message clear, short, concise, and you can generate savings in lots of ways.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I think marketers face when they do get into this planning stage is looking at the past activity, which is obviously a good indicator of what's been done, and we do need to do that. But Kate, do you find that a lot of marketers use that past activity to determine what needs to happen in the future? And what's wrong with that approach?
Yeah, I think the start point for most marketers is what did I do last year, and then let's lay that out as a skeleton plan and then maybe change a little bit around the edges. We're seeing unprecedented change at the moment, in terms of opportunities, but also the way, we're beholden to Google and Facebook for quite a lot of our digital budget. And as soon as they change their algorithms or their conditions, then everyone's scrabbling around for, okay, what does that mean? There's big changes there. But also there's a lot of disruptive business models coming to play. Look at Amazon coming into the market this year. So being aware of those things and sort of thinking, right, actually, these are the challenges ahead is probably a more sensible way to look at it than this is what I did last year.
And Jen, you've spoken about feasibility reviews in the past, and we've both spoken about that together. And do you think this is actually a solution to this problem? So, you've got this past information, and that's great, but in order to move forward, here's a feasibility review. How do you do it?
Right. So I did speak about that a little bit earlier when we first started out, but it is really... the way you do it is make sure that you get all the interested parties to collaborate in one forum.
Yes.
So you need the right people in the room. You need the right decision makers because there's conflicting interests. And it's about having that sort of decision-making party that can cut across all the individual priorities and really come up with what's best for the business as a whole. And that's really hard because people are so passionate about the work that they're working on.
Yes.
But, you need somebody that can really look across the profitability of the business and go, hey, I'm sorry, but this piece is actually more important today.
And I think it's fine for us to now, as marketers, recognise and have the whole business recognise that we do impact every single touch point within an organisation. So therefore, it's important that we actually take a look at what the business is doing and incorporate our plan around that, as opposed to just looking at our own little circle, making sure that we've actually got plans in place for the entire business, not just ourselves.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
definitely. Now, I want to go into an area that we're all very familiar with, and this is spreadsheets, right? And I think we are all very familiar with them. And when it does come to planning, and if we do have a lack of tools, or maybe there's just, you know, a lack of awareness in terms of what's available or even ready to us as a marketing team, and they actually ran a study, and I know no one's probably going to be surprised by this, but according to one of the studies, 9 out of 10 organisations actually do use spreadsheets for planning, but only 1 in 5 is happy with them. And I think we can all relate to the fact that planning in spreadsheets is very time consuming. It can be very inefficient, sometimes error prone, but as well, the data is really static. So the collaboration and version control can also be quite difficult. So Jen, is this a problem that you see when you consult on a regular basis, and how do we get out of it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's still out there so much. It's so surprising how many people still use spreadsheets to do it. And the real issue is around real-time visibility. So we need to be able to create the right views for decision makers. So it's how many times the CMOs just don't even have a real understanding of what's out in market or what's being planned. So we need to be able to make these calendars more dynamic so that you can cut and sort them in all different ways to present exactly the right view that you need to make those decisions. So being able to attribute your calendars in many, many different ways. You know, there's big, small activity, there's always on, there's, you know, every different shape, and you need to be able to quickly and easily sort and shift that, but also have it real time rather than having everybody go, hey, it's that time again to go back in and update things. It should be done on the fly, constantly being updated and real time, and matching your media plans and all your activity plans.
And Kate, as someone who's guided by numbers, that's what I insert that there. I don't want to be too stereotypical, but you know, when it does come to planning, you know, with finance and spreadsheets, everyone loves them, and when it does come to marketing, it's just what we know. But what's your experience with them, and can the two coexist?
I could go on about spreadsheets for hours, but I mean, there's 2 key problems. I think the first one's consistency. So as Jen said, you know, you've got all these different ways you can chop and change to analyse. I can bet you every team will have a different way to name it and call it. And so comparing that across the business becomes impossible. And the second thing is people tend to, as you get to in-market, they tend to stop updating. So they're really interested until it's signed off. And then as things change as we go forward, it just gets forgotten. Now, when you want to reconcile and look at effectiveness at the end, the number of times you'll go back and someone will be, oh, that wasn't actually what happened. But if you're reconciling 6 months later, you've lost all of that knowledge, and it becomes really kind of fundamental to judging success if you haven't got that ongoing updating. So making it part of the workflow in a rigorous sense so that every change goes through is critical.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on some of your pain points that we're going through today. Also, if you have any questions for the panel, please feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll get to them. So as we move on, let's go into data, because this is something that excites us all, I'm sure. And one of the things that we can relate to is, you know, the data that's there, or sometimes a lack of data that we don't actually have to look back on and then obviously plan for the year ahead. So it can obviously impact us when measuring our campaign effectiveness. And Kate, how important do you think that it is that we respond to things that we need to, but then also there's some stuff there that we don't need to respond to?
Absolutely. And I think kind of understanding up front what are your metrics and what you're going to be tracking, and what are your kind of real key solid things that you want to be consistent with, and what do you need to change. You know, if you know something's not working and you know why it's not working, then get it fixed. You know, it might be that I realised my target audience was wrong and I should change that as quickly as I can. But if I've got a sort of brand message out there, I probably need to give it some time and not chop and change. But you also need to understand it in the broader context. We often get kind of, I guess, into looking at just one data set, one reason to measure something. So I might think my campaign's not working, but actually it's a service issue down the line. Maybe the branch or the store wasn't trained on that new product. If I don't look at it from those two different angles, I might pull the campaign, and that was totally the wrong decision to make. So it's really making sure that you understand that from a much broader context.
And I think, this is all starting to piece together, because if we are using spreadsheets and we don't have that visibility and we're not seeing what's happening every step of the way, and we're just updating a spreadsheet because they're like, oh God, I need to report this, I need to push this up, and I'm just going in there monthly and updating it, then we don't get that full picture, so we don't get all the data, do we?
And then worried that it's my fault because I think my campaign's not working, so I'm not necessarily looking, broader. I might try and forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. So when it does come to integrating data into your planning tool overall, how can we make this stress-free? Because I think a lot of us do get caught up in these vanity metrics, and we think that that's the effectiveness of our campaign, and we start to use that for the year ahead. But what's your advice on this one, Jen?
Yeah, I think the single most important thing that we can do is really make sure that data is well embedded into our process. So it's about really making sure that it's consistently applied. The number of times I've worked with customers and looked at their briefs and said, where is the data section? Where are your targets? What are you trying to achieve? And if that's not crystal clear up front, then there's no hope for you. So, we look at different strategies for making sure that that first of all, it's built into the process, it's built into your brief, it's crystal clear what sort of metrics need to be tracked. And that these briefs it's part of the approval process, that there's a set of eyes going over it and saying, yes, this is what we want to achieve as a business.
Yep. Definitely. And I think, as we do talk about data and getting it into that tool, we do have all these execution tools, but there seems to be data in so many different places. So it just keeps coming back to having that single source of truth, whereas marketers, we can actually use all this and then go forward and plan with. So now moving on to visibility, because as we were saying at the beginning, marketing is responsible for not just the marketing team itself, but, the customer experience and different touch points and everything we're doing when we are impacting the bottom line. But it does seem like we measure so much. Where do we fall short? And when it comes to making marketing work more effectively, how can we actually go out and give visibility to the entire organisation to A, show what we're doing, but also B, talk about data when it comes to marketing activity? Because it seems like we measure all of our campaigns and that's great, but when we actually have to measure how well our teams are performing, do we even do that?
Yeah, so that's just it. I mean, we talk about how important it is to measure your marketing, but it's equally as important to measure your marketers, right? Again, it's that opportunity to really streamline things, cut out some costs, cut out the time wasting, make everyone more effective. So the way we do that is we actually, if you're working in a system that can timestamp everything and track everything, you can really see where the capability gaps are. So you can see where your I call them star performers, and training opportunities, right? So, examples might be you've got a team that's great at doing their briefs. They get it right every single time. It, flies through the approval process. And then you've got other teams that really struggle and they get knocked back consistently. So you then go, okay, that's a great metric. I can see that this team is struggling. Let's put some programs in place to improve the effectiveness of that team. Let's give them some guidance. Let's, ghost notes in their briefing. Let's give them additional training. Let's partner them up, do some peer reviews, things like that, give some extra coaching. Or it may be those nervous Nellies working with the agency, there are some marketers that might go back to the agency like 8 times after each approval round, and that costs a lot of extra money working with the agency. They charge you for additional rounds. So if you can get them sort of streamlined and confident around getting all their feedback down to the 2 SLAs that they're meant to be doing with the agency, again, you can save money, you can improve the effectiveness, you can improve your speed to market, reduce the cost of your campaigns.
Yeah, funny you mentioned agencies, because we just had a question from Todd here. So we work a lot with agencies. We actually work with 4 different agencies within our organisation. Do you think that we also need to measure the effectiveness with them as well as our internal teams?
That's a great question, because there's always the finger pointing, and
yes,
I love it, because a lot of the time you blame it on the agency. It's easy to say it's the agency's fault, but the metrics that I'm seeing are actually the approval process can weigh things down so much. So it's really important to make sure that you're getting that approval process correct in-house. But we wanted to talk a little bit about agencies. It's really around being able to measure the effectiveness of your relationship between all your counterparts, whether that's internal stakeholders or external agencies. Having the measures, having the metrics, having the data will tell you exactly where you need to concentrate your efforts to streamline things.
And that's where having those common metrics really helps as well, because, you're managing 4 agencies. It's critical that they understand what they're working to and how many rounds of the process they're expected to have. So it doesn't become this fluid, we've got until, 2 weeks before the campaign, and as long as it's done before that, it doesn't matter. So the expectations and the sort of metrics that are common across everyone is a really effective way to manage that process.
And I love what you said earlier, Jen, even about, when you are putting your plans in place, having all that in the briefing process. And I think a lot of us, just when we are working with agencies, think of a brief as, here's something, because it's just, here's what you need to do. Not really, what are our goals? What do we, how do we even have a consistent brief that the whole marketing team uses when they are communicating with agencies? So you don't have all this different language and even messaging going forward, because it can actually really impact everything you're doing from a day-to-day
It's one of the biggest time-consuming process, and the sort of, an agency coming back and the client saying, that wasn't really what I expected, and a 2 and 4th there. So getting that fixed at the beginning is key.
And you can talk about this all day. So now that we've actually spoken about knowing what your team is working on, and we understand the importance of that, I just really want to go into the fact that, sometimes there's a lack of visibility in terms of the marketing plan. And obviously we said we want the whole organisation to be able to see what we're doing. I also think that there's some element of truth when it comes to marketing teams being not really flexible and therefore not responsive. So Kate, as you alluded to at the beginning, things are changing really fast, from technology to everything that we actually work with on a daily basis. Marketers are now responsible for so many other areas. So along with a lack of visibility, do you agree that many marketers are also a little bit less flexible because they're trying to do things so quickly, but sometimes the structure of an organisation or a team won't allow them to, so therefore when something changes, they're not as responsive?
I think there's an element of risk. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and a lot of decisions to make. So I think that a lot of the time it's kind of falling back on what you do know and what you do comfortable with, and that's I guess a standard way we operate with when things are changing. So it's not sort of surprising in that sense. I think one of the kind of key things is always going to be experimentation, but setting those expectations again up front in terms of what we're going to do.
Exactly. And I think there's this notion that we spoke about earlier today around the 70-20-10 rule as well. So, is this still valid, the fact that, in the past 70% of your budget was going towards exactly what worked, and then 20% goes to the new things that you're sort of looking into, and then 10% is for those first and those bright and shiny things that come up?
I think it's a great rule of thumb. I think one of the things is you need to look at how you apply that across a business. And if you've got big enough budgets, then that works really well. With some of the kind of smaller brands, 10% doesn't really buy you that much. And you probably need to kind of think about pooled learnings and maybe experimenting with something with less risk, or, being a bit flexible about going to change it and having those kind of markers in place to know if it's working or not. The other big thing is that, as marketing have expanded the areas they're kind of responsible for, what's the budget these days? Because there's quite a lot of investment in technology and measurement tools and, platforms, which sort of sits outside that, but it's definitely something that needs to be kind of considered within the overall sort of budget, and then how many years you're going to expect to get gains over that for. So.
And that really talks into the fact that marketers, CMOs now need to work with the CFOs and the CTOs to actually make this work. And do you think it's worth, at the beginning of this process, sitting down with these people to actually say, okay, guys, this is going to impact us all. We need to now work as a team. And how do you incorporate that into your planning, Jen?
Right. Well, I mean, we're talking about the onset of agile marketing as well, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interest in it. There's a lot of noise about it. And how do you do it? It's really tricky to bring that concept in. But we're seeing a lot of gains and a lot of rethinking around how do you deal with your budget if you're going to do agile marketing, right? So the idea is that really you're setting up the right process to allow yourself to iterate within the larger plans. So a good place to start is really in the channel execution. Maybe don't try to tackle the entire integrated campaign, but have that agile marketing within certain channels and attempt it. Start small and iterate.
And actually also have a question from Sophie here. So she's asked, when it does come to agile marketing, we have tried it within our organisation, but it seems like it's a little bit harder than what we first thought. Do you think an organisation a marketing team, needs to be of a similar size to actually run it? So is there, do you think, the right size for someone to be agile? Do you have to be small or large? And just Sophie on that as well, we actually have an ebook that you can download in the resource tab around hacking agile marketing, if you want to refer to that. But over to you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not that it can't be done in all different shapes and sizes. It's just a matter of how it's applied. So you need the right endorsement, the right coaching, because it's hard to get started with it. It's a shift in mindset. So you really need to, like I said, building that process that's going to allow it to work. So I've seen it work really well in sort of medium-sized businesses, medium and small-sized businesses, but it can be successful in a large business if you get the right coaching in.
Yeah. Have you had any experience with agile ways of working?
Quite a bit, but probably more from the technology side of things than the marketing and sort of putting those projects in. And it's kind of critical there, I think, you find, because there's so many iterations you need to go through when you've got the big technology changes. Having that expectation up front and those kind of markers along the way is key, and being able to change. Otherwise, you can see these projects go on for years. So, it's very key.
I'm a fan of being bilingual in the larger corporations, because it is hard to get everybody to shift gears straight away. So it's that almost having waterfall at a high level where you're setting your targets for the year and all that sort of thing, and then having agile within some of the streams.
And like you said, it's about starting that pilot. You don't need to transfer everyone and make them work like that, but, test it out, short cycles, see what works, and then go from there.
And understand where the problems are likely to be. I mean, I think we have to accept that there's still finance reporting cycles that are going to be very hard to move away. So the CFO is probably not going to buy into that changing all the time. They need to be
not everyone's going to be agile.
But, certainly in the levels below that, there's plenty of opportunity.
Definitely. And like I said, if you do have any further questions about Agile, or you do want to read some more, please feel free to refer to the resource tab. So the final thing I really want to cover is short-termism. And I think, as we were saying earlier, marketers have really fought to be responsible or make an impact on the bottom line. Yet many still focus, when it comes to their marketing return on investment, on which is an efficiency measure at the end of the day, on that as opposed to profits or growth of the entire company. So we were saying, at the beginning, when it does come to a marketer's planning or what they need to be responsible for, marketers are now responsible for acquisition as well. But there's so many different ways of thinking of what we need to be responsible for. So do you actually think, Kate, a lot of the time we're just too focused on our own little pocket and the ROI, and we don't actually, when we plan for, the profits or the growth of the company, and we don't actually see ourselves as a whole?
Yeah, I think one of the things is obviously a lot of the marketing's kind of longer term, and there's a lot of other elements that go into sort of our profit overall levels that marketers haven't been kind of in charge of. So they've gone for this sort of shorter term, what marketing's responsible for. Now, what's happened is marketing's now responsible for more, and I think there's probably been a bit of excitement for marketers in that actually finally we have an easy measure in sort of acquisitions, particularly for online companies, that we can now really show a clear link towards our marketing activity and what's been sold. But really it's not a like for like, because if you think about it, a lot of that activity was going on place in the retail stores and the sales staff. And I think what's happened is we've maybe dropped the ball a little bit on those longer term measures, the kind of brand tracking, the brand equity, the fact that actually if I have really engaged consumers, they're a lot more profitable, they're willing to pay more. Some of those things that really drive brand growth and overall revenue. So I think we need to rebalance the kind of metrics in a bit, and kind of accept that, you know, marketers now have a sales and a marketing role, if you like, and be very clear about the metrics for each, rather than judge us just on that final sale.
And just on that, so Jen, a recent study from Britain's Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, that's a bit of a mouthful, has shown that the optimal mix for most companies, even in the digital era, is around 60% to brand and 40% to activation. And that should be targeted activity designed to provoke an action. So would you agree with this, Jen?
Yeah. Actually, I participated in a modelling exercise at a company that I worked for, and it was really interesting that it was a pretty in-depth model. And, you know, we talked about budgets before, and budgets are sometimes product-centric, or and what it showed is that by having this concentration on brand media mix, it actually supported all the products below.
Got it.
So it's important to have a look at that, and I think more and more marketing teams are having that better understanding of across all the different products, or across all the, because now we're looking at customer centricity rather than just individual products.
Yes.
And it's not so much about owning the budget for that individual product, it's around the profitability for the business as a whole, and being, you know, that's where we were talking about feasibility earlier, and that competing interests. It's really stepping that level up and saying, how are we contributing to the profitability of the business as a whole, not just my own little
patch. And just quite a simple question, which I was actually going to ask, so great minds, Brian. Should sales be involved in the marketing planning stages? Sales teams. Hey, you know, like we were saying earlier, when you are planning this, it's not just about your marketing teams. You know, acquisition is obviously a big responsibility for a lot of marketers. So why not bring everyone in?
Well, this is really, I see it as integral to it, because the marketing team's target should be the sales team's targets. Yes. And that's what you start out with for the year, right? What is the sales team looking to achieve? Marketing needs to support that. And you need to look at the funnel of activity that you're putting down there, and you know, how leaky is your bucket, all that sort of stuff. So you're working directly with the sales team up front to say, I'm here to support those sales targets, and I think they should be filtered down into your briefs and into your
when we were talking earlier, you know, you set these plans in place, but it's also important to bring these other teams in when you do loop back on a regular basis. So you're not just going in there, putting the data or whatever your return on investment or any sort of information in there. You are bringing back these teams in, so you're not just catching up with them once a year when it comes to planning. It's sort of a process that's ongoing, isn't it? And do you think we make that mistake sometimes?
I think very much. I mean, once you get into the kind of live planning of things, people go back into their own sort of areas and focus on it. And a number of times you kind of see, you know, maybe something went wrong with the media, so it got pulled, but now it doesn't align with the sales campaign, and you've just lost a huge bunch of ROI because you had a big price promotion that you were going to promote, and now they're not aligned. So, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so we've actually gone through those 9 solutions for modernising marketing, but what I want to do, because I feel like we just need to consolidate everything because there's so much knowledge and we could actually talk all day about it. Kate, what's your number one tip for marketing planning?
I mean, the key thing for me, obviously, I'm a big fan of measurement, and I think that's absolutely fundamental. But I think the kind of key thing is we need to know the why as well as the what. I think we've got all very excited about a lot of the digital vanity metrics, and we can track those over time, but it's very hard to generalize and apply to the broader business unless you understand why something's happening. And you can't necessarily always see if that's good or bad without that. So I think we do need to focus a little bit on the why element, so that we can keep that broader across the business and reapply those learnings throughout our planning process.
And Jen, obviously you go into consult to a lot of marketing teams and obviously seen the transformation of planning, but also digital and how that's impacting everything that we do. What would be your number one tip based on everything we've discussed?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to me, I'm all about process as well. Process and productivity, they go hand in hand. But it's, you know, often I come in and I work with companies and they go, here's some marketing managers, they'll help you understand our process. And I go, whoa. That's nice and all, but let's get some guiding principles in place up front. I want some agreement from the leadership team around what is it that we're trying to drive and where are the opportunities to really streamline the process, and have we all bought into this? So the guiding principles agreement up front is really important before we get down to the nitty gritty, and then we can link it all back up to, you know, it's even just the stakeholder matrix, it's around risk, it's all those sort of things. But if you don't have that agreement from the leadership team level, then you're not going to get the right level of change.
Yeah. And if you are interested in finding out more about Jen and also Kate and how they can help your marketing teams, just go down to the bio section on the platform there and you'll be able to go straight to their LinkedIn profile, and that's probably the best way to contact you guys. Sure. Yeah. I think those guiding principles are great as well, because I think a lot of the times, like we said at the beginning, we just get straight into what we've always done and we just think, okay, we'll change it up with a few campaigns here and there, maybe put some brand elements into it, not actually realising that it's almost like the definition of insanity, isn't it? Just expecting a different result every single time. So thank you both for joining. It's been excellent just to get two very different yet similar perspectives, if I can say, which I wasn't expecting. So I'm glad we're all on the same page. And thank you everyone else for joining. Once we close down the event, you will be directed to a survey. So your feedback is very much appreciated. It's also clear, just as a roundup, that it's an amazing time to be a marketer. However, it's very overwhelming. So marketing resource management solutions such as Simple can help marketers get to market faster and plan, review and optimize all their activities with one single source of truth. So very exciting, lots to take in, but thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to the two of you. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys.
Thank you. Bye.